Hey everyone, I've been reading this X-Men the Animated Series, The Adaptations Omnibus. This is really cool. When this was announced, I was really excited. I'm a big fan of the X-Men Animated Series, and I'm also a big fan of the comic book adaptations. So having this enormous omnibus of, like, nearly every X-Men animated adaptation, or at least the original 90s cartoon, this is really cool to have. The image quality is really good. Everything's in order. There doesn't seem to be anything cut out. And it goes all the way up to when it was, let's see, they changed the style around. Let me try and find like a, let's see, X-Men Adventures. Very 90s looking. Reading through this, like, I read a lot of the individual issues. I didn't have all of them. That was one of the reasons why I was really excited to get this, because it's all the adaptations all in one place. Let's see. X-Men Adventures 1992, 94, 95. Alright, so the first run was 15 issues, second was 13, and the third was 13. So that's really cool to have everything all in order. And I was kind of disappointed. Some of my favorite episodes of the show never received any kind of comic book adaptation, at least not in these particular runs that are collected here. I'm hoping maybe in the future we can get another omnibus collecting animated series adaptations, because I know there's a few others out there. So yeah, everything in this really cool. I really love the first two runs. The third run, where the style kind of changes, I'm not as big of a fan of that. The original series, one of the really cool things with it was taking stories that were specifically from the animated series, which themselves were usually taken from the comics, but it was really cool to see the comic adaptations, because it took things that were specifically from the animated series and, like, translated them back into a very natural feeling comic book. Like, it didn't really feel awkward or anything. Like, usually when I read a comic book adaptation of a movie or a show, there'll be things in it that, like, it cuts out, and so it feels like if I were to just read the comic without having seen the movie or the show, it's kind of weird. Like, there should be something more here linking it together, but with the comic, everything works perfectly well. It feels very natural. If there was no show, I could read these, and they flow, like, pretty naturally, like just a typical X-Men comic. Especially later on, they feel like a really, like, typical X-Men comic. The last run, though, the art style changes, the layout and format changes completely, and I'm not as big a fan. I think the idea was they were trying to make it look more like the animated series, though it really doesn't. It just looks like a less detailed comic, and also it kind of starts to suffer from those problems like I talked about before in typical adaptation comics, where there's things that should happen to link things, and it just feels like it's incomplete or there's parts missing. So that's unfortunate. Also, I'm just not a big fan of the art style they use later on. It's fine, but I don't think it works well for the kind of stories they're trying to tell here. Like, X-Men is, for the most part, generally kind of serious toned, and that artwork I think works better for, like, if it was something goofy or a satire, like Howard the Duck or something. Now, the interesting thing, it doesn't have these. Adventures of the X-Men. After X-Men Adventures ended, it kind of was rebranded into the Adventures of the X-Men, which is an okay comic. It uses that kind of cartoonier style, more stylized, exaggerated looks for everybody. It's not quite as detailed as the original comics were. But the interesting thing, while these ones took influence from the cartoon and the animated series comics, these ones were very much their own thing. And there's another comic up here I wanted to just to bring up. Let's see, in the 80s, there was Pride of the X-Men, all about Kitty Pryde joining the X-Men. It was an animated thing, and it led to the animated X-Men series, and it had a comic, but it wasn't like a traditional comic. It was just screenshots from the special assembled into a comic, so it's kind of like a cinemanga or a photo novel, I think is the old word they call this type of thing. So this isn't included. It would have been kind of nice to just toss this in as a bonus or something, I think, but It's fine. The other thing that kind of disappoints me, but I've come to accept this when it comes to omnibuses and just collections in general, there's no letters pages included. That's kind of unfortunate, because that's always like a nice little time capsule to see the letters pages in for things like this. Especially like when it's an adaptation of a show, you get people writing in talking about the little differences and subtle things that were like altered or kept the same from the original to the adaptation, and that's really cool. So anyway, this is a really cool book if you're a fan of the X-Men animated series and you've never read the comics. This is a really great resource to have. If you're a fan of the X-Men, this is like a definite must-buy because like it's just peak X-Men. It's X-Men like at the top of their popularity, and I think a lot of people agree that the best X-Men was this particular lineup that we had in the early to mid 90s. So yeah, X-Men, the animated series, the adaptations, Marvel Omnibus. Really, really cool. Happy to have this. It might go on sale on Amazon, but yeah, if you want it, I'd say definitely pick it up pretty soon, because these omnibuses tend to get pretty rare pretty quickly. Or if you're lucky, you might even happen across it, like at Barnes & Nobles or something. So, yeah, that's it for this one. Hope you enjoyed it. See ya.